In the year 218 BCE, the Mediterranean world trembled at the footsteps of one man's audacious dream. Here, in our miniature recreation of Carthage, we see the bustling North African city that birthed one of history's most daring military campaigns. Hannibal Barca, son of the great Hamilcar, gazed across these very waters with a vision that would shake Rome to its core. Our tiny figures represent the moment when Hannibal made his fateful decision. Rather than face Rome's superior navy, he would take the impossible route, marching his entire army, complete with war elephants, across the treacherous Alps. Look closely at our miniature Hannibal figure, standing resolute among his war council. This wasn't just military strategy, it was a gamble that would echo through the ages. The scale of this undertaking becomes clear when we examine our diorama's details. Each tiny soldier represents hundreds of real men who would follow their commander into the unknown. The miniature elephants, crafted with meticulous attention to detail, remind us that these massive beasts had never attempted such a journey. Yet Hannibal's conviction was absolute. Rome must fall, and surprise would be his greatest weapon. Witness the magnificence of departure as our miniature world comes alive with the greatest military procession of the ancient world. Here we see Hannibal's massive army beginning their legendary march: 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, all represented in stunning miniature detail across our diorama landscape. Each tiny figure tells a story of courage and uncertainty. Our Celtic warriors, distinguished by their distinctive shields and weapons, march alongside seasoned Carthaginian veterans. The Numidian cavalry, renowned throughout the Mediterranean, are positioned at the flanks of our miniature formation, their small horses captured in perfect detail. But it's the elephants that truly capture the imagination in our miniature scene. These gentle giants, each standing barely inches tall in our diorama, yet representing creatures that towered over ancient battlefields, lumber forward with their mahouts perched atop. The logistics alone were staggering. Imagine feeding these beasts during a mountain crossing. Our miniature supply train stretches endlessly behind the main force, each tiny cart loaded with provisions for the impossible journey ahead. The morning sun casts long shadows across our diorama as this miniature army begins what many believed would be their final march. Our diorama now transforms to show the Spanish peninsula, where Hannibal's miniature forces carved their path toward destiny. These tiny settlements scattered across our landscape represent the fierce Iberian tribes that stood between Carthage and the Alps. Each miniature fortification tells a story of siege warfare and diplomatic cunning. Watch as our tiny Carthaginian siege engines, no larger than matchboxes, demonstrate the methodical conquest of Spanish strongholds. Hannibal wasn't simply passing through, he was securing his rear guard and recruiting fresh warriors for the trials ahead. Our miniature Spanish warriors, with their distinctive armor and weapons, join the growing tide of tiny figures flowing northward. The detail in our diorama reveals the complexity of ancient warfare. See how our miniature engineers construct bridges over tiny rivers, while supply lines stretch back toward Africa. Every small fortified town that fell added to Hannibal's strength, but also to his responsibilities. Our tiny figures represent not just soldiers, but an entire migrating nation determined to bring Rome to its knees. By the time our miniature army reaches the foothills of the Pyrenees, it has grown even larger. Fresh Spanish recruits swell the ranks, while the original Carthaginian corps remains disciplined at the center of our ever-expanding diorama army. Behold our first taste of mountain warfare as our miniature army encounters the towering Pyrenees. These carefully crafted mountain peaks, though measured in inches, represent the first true test of Hannibal's resolve. Our tiny figures snake through narrow passes, each one a masterpiece of miniature craftsmanship, showing the perils of high-altitude warfare. The Pyrenean tribes, represented by fierce little warriors positioned on our miniature cliff tops, rained down arrows and stones on the passing army. See how our diorama captures the chaos. Tiny shields raised defensively, miniature horses rearing in panic, and the precious war elephants huddling together in the narrow defiles. Each small figure represents hundreds of real men who faced this baptism by stone and steel. Our miniature landscape shows the ingenious solutions Hannibal's engineers devised. Tiny rope bridges span impossible chasms, while miniature platforms allow the massive elephants to navigate treacherous ledges. The attention to detail in our diorama extends to showing the very ropes and pulleys used to haul supplies up impossible slopes. As our camera pulls back, we see the full scope of the challenge. An entire miniature army stretched across miles of unforgiving terrain, each tiny figure representing the courage required to attempt the impossible. The Pyrenees were merely practice for what lay ahead. Our diorama now unfolds across the verdant lands of Gaul, where diplomacy proved as crucial as military might. These miniature Celtic settlements, complete with tiny roundhouses and elaborate fortifications, welcomed Hannibal as a liberator from Roman oppression. Each small figure in our Gallic villages represents a potential ally in the coming war against Rome. Watch as our miniature Hannibal, distinguished by his purple cloak and noble bearing, meets with Celtic chieftains beneath tiny oak trees. These diplomatic gatherings, recreated in perfect miniature detail, secured safe passage and vital supplies for the arduous journey ahead. Our tiny Celtic warriors, with their distinctive torques and colourful shields, join the growing miniature army with enthusiasm. The diorama reveals the cultural exchange taking place. Carthaginian smiths work alongside Celtic craftsmen at tiny forges, while our miniature supply trains grow fat with Gallic provisions. The war elephants, now comfortable with mountain terrain, graze peacefully in miniature meadows, while local children, represented by the tiniest figures in our diorama, watch in wonder. But not all encounters were peaceful. Our miniature battlefields show where some Celtic tribes chose to resist. The detailed combat scenes in our diorama demonstrate Hannibal's tactical brilliance, with tiny cavalry executing perfect flanking maneuvers around miniature hill forts. Each victory added to his legend and his army's confidence. The moment of truth arrives as our diorama presents the mighty Alps in all their miniature majesty. These towering peaks, crafted with painstaking attention to geological detail, represent nature's ultimate fortress. Our tiny army, now stretched across the valley floor like a living carpet of humanity, faces the impossible challenge that will define Hannibal's legacy. Look closely at our miniature soldiers as they gaze upward at the snow-capped peaks. Even in miniature form, you can sense their awe and trepidation. The war elephants, magnificent even at this tiny scale, seem to understand the enormity of the task ahead. Their mahouts check and recheck the miniature equipment that will determine life or death in the coming weeks. Our diorama's weather effects show the first signs of winter approaching. Tiny snowflakes dust the higher peaks, while autumn colors paint the miniature forests below. The detail extends to showing how our miniature army prepares for the ascent. Tiny figures distribute cold weather gear, while miniature smiths work frantically to create crampons and ice axes for the treacherous journey ahead. The sheer scale becomes apparent as our camera pulls back to show the entire miniature army, dwarfed by the Alpine Massif. 90,000 tiny figures preparing to attempt what no army had ever dared, crossing the Alps with an entire military force, including creatures that had never seen snow. Now we witness the most harrowing chapter of our miniature epic, the Alpine crossing itself. Our diorama transforms into a frozen hell where every tiny figure fights for survival against impossible odds. The miniature mountain passes, carved with realistic ice and snow effects, become death traps where one wrong step means oblivion. Watch as our tiny war elephants, their miniature feet wrapped in specially crafted protective gear, navigate ledges barely wider than their massive bodies. The largest creatures on our diorama become tragic heroes, their ancient eyes reflecting the terror of heights and cold they were never meant to endure. Several of our miniature giants stumble and fall, their tiny forms tumbling into the painted depths below. The attention to detail in our alpine diorama is breathtaking. Miniature avalanches cascade down tiny slopes, burying unfortunate figures in their wake. Our tiny soldiers huddle together for warmth, their miniature breath visible in the frigid air. The supply train, so vital to survival, struggles along icy paths where a single misstep could send precious food tumbling into the abyss. Celtic tribesmen, positioned on our miniature cliff-tops, rain death down upon the vulnerable column. Each tiny arrow and spear represents the constant threat of ambush in terrain where retreat was impossible and advance seemed suicidal. Yet still, our miniature Hannibal leads from the front, his tiny figure visible at the head of the column, inspiring his men through their darkest hour. Triumph and tragedy merge as our miniature army finally emerges from their alpine ordeal. Our diorama now shows the sun-drenched Po Valley stretching endlessly before the survivors, each tiny figure representing both victory over impossible odds and the terrible cost of their achievement. The contrast between the white alpine peaks behind and the green Italian plains ahead speaks to the magnitude of their accomplishment. Count the cost in our miniature tableau. Where once 90,000 tiny figures began the journey, barely 26,000 remain. The war elephants, those magnificent miniature giants, number only 20 now, their tiny forms scarred by frostbite and exhaustion. Each surviving figure in our diorama has been transformed by their ordeal, tiny faces etched with the hard-won wisdom of those who have stared death in the face and lived. But what survivors they are! Our miniature army may be reduced in number, but they are now bound by shared suffering and incredible achievement. These tiny warriors have accomplished the impossible, crossing mountain barriers that even miniature eagles struggle to navigate. The detail in our diorama shows them caring for wounded comrades and tending to the precious elephants that made the journey possible. Our miniature Hannibal stands triumphant on a rocky outcrop, his tiny form silhouetted against the Italian sky. In our diorama, this moment represents more than military strategy. It's the triumph of human will over nature's most formidable obstacles. As our miniature epic concludes, we behold the full scope of Hannibal's incredible achievement spread across our complete diorama landscape. From the tiny harbors of Carthage to the green valleys of northern Italy, every inch of our miniature world tells the story of one man's impossible dream, made reality through courage, genius, and terrible sacrifice. The war elephants that survive in our final scene have become legends themselves. These miniature giants who crossed the roof of the world will strike terror into Roman hearts for years to come. Though many of their tiny companions perished in the Alpine crossing, those that remain represent the indomitable will that made this campaign possible. Our diorama preserves for all time the moment when the impossible became reality. These tiny figures spread across our miniature landscape represent more than just military history. They embody the human spirit's refusal to accept limitations. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps remains one of history's greatest achievements, a testament to what can be accomplished when vision, courage, and determination unite. The legacy lives on in our miniature world, where every tiny soldier, every miniature elephant, and every small detail reminds us that sometimes the impossible is simply the untried. Through the lens of our diorama, we see not just ancient history, but timeless inspiration, the story of those who dared to dream beyond the boundaries of the possible and made their dreams reality through sheer force of will.